All right, we're live. Thank you everybody for joining another Evolve Lab Live. I'm very grateful and honored to have the very famous Randy Deutsch on the Evolve Lab Live podcast and video series. How you doing, Randy?
Doing fantastic. Great to see you, Bill.
Yeah, likewise. This is the first time we got a chance to chat. I know you through the interwebs, follow you on Twitter. Of course, all the books that you're writing, which I have a ton of questions about. For those that don't know Randy, Randy's a fellow at the AIA, which is the highest membership honor for that society. For those that don't know, Randy served as the Associate Director of Graduate Studies, as the Clinical Associate Professor of Research and Design, Professional Practice. He's an international keynote speaker, workshop leader, AI researcher, and design technology authority. He's been on TED Talks. I watched some of his TED Talks this week. Really great stuff on there. Is an architect responsible for over 1,000 large, complex, sustainable projects. Has been featured in Architect Magazine. Has written multiple books, which we have up here. BIM and Integrated Design, Convergence, the Redesign of Design, Data-Driven Design and Construction, Super Users, Design Technology Specialist, and the Future of Practice, Think Like an Architect, and then most recently, Adapt as an Architect. Thanks so much, Randy. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Bill, for that introduction. And I think we all know all I do is pretty much tweet on Twitter, and the rest of the stuff is just icing. So, no, it's heartening to hear the introduction. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Any gaps that I missed or anything that you'd also like, the people listening in to know about you, some background, either professional or personal wise, maybe hobbies or other things that you have interest in that we should know about?
Well, what you were describing, I don't think that person that you were describing could possibly fit in any hobbies. Yeah, I still only am allotted 24 hours in the day. But no, just the common thread through all of this is just trying to help others advance in their own careers and helping, if I've got a bias, and it's not a very popular one, certainly not popular in social media, it's that I want people when they can to reinvent themselves, reinvigorate their careers, but at the same time, wherever possible, to stay and to help move the architecture, engineering, construction field forward. And that includes the people who reinvent themselves and do other things as well, but not to, if at all possible, not to completely abandon us to, work in another market or field.
That's a really good comment, and I have a question about that. I remember I used to work in architecture. I worked at HD Architecture for almost a decade, working on really large commercial projects. And one of the challenges that we always chatted about is that we were losing really good designers and architects to other industries, specifically the gaming industry. There's no value engineering that occurs when you're doing video game design and designing, cities and structures. For first-person shooter games or story games. And so you have this kind of unlimited design budget. And so that was one of the draws that some architects and designers were having as related to going towards other industries. Are there other industries that you would say that are also pulling architects and designers away from architecture?
Absolutely. There's the wonderful book by Harrison Hyde, Architects After Architecture, where they talk about the different careers that former architects have gone into. And while in my own experience, there's no question that gaming has been a huge one. It was certainly a much bigger one 5 to 10 years ago than I think it currently is, in part because we've already gone through a generation of architects who were looking for more immediate gratification than spending 6 to 8 years on a laboratory or hospital project, so they can, so they can perhaps work on a team and get their product out in a matter of months instead of a matter of years. The thing is that, those same architects have gone on to, let's say, start families, and they want to be able to point out the window to their little kids that, daddy or mommy worked on this. And in terms of gratification, you learn over a period of time that some of the projects we work on while styles will come and go in architecture, buildings are going to be around, and there's a lot of responsibility because of that. And so the time that's put into a project that is going to have a positive, hopefully positive impact on people is something that a lot of the people that have gone into other fields, they've realized that there's a lot to be said for being in a field like architecture. To go back to your original question, absolutely. I mean, I've seen former architects go into the movie industry to work, if not literally on sets, but also to work on the content of media. I've seen former architects work in the food industry in terms of user interface, in terms of helping to name products and companies. And yeah, so I think there's a number of other fields that architects have gone into. I've gone out of my way, as I was starting to say, in terms of my main bias, not to have a litany of examples, because what I don't want people to do is like, please go on. What other ones can I apply to? But Bill, also, I consider someone like yourself still staying in the industry. The people you talk to, we've crossed paths out on the road as road warriors. Whether I'm doing a keynote and you're doing workshops or working with universities, you're very much in the industry. You've hired my former students at Evolve Lab, which is huge. What I love about that is it allows my students to follow their bliss, to go after who they are on a DNA level without having to compromise, but at the same time to leverage their education within the field. I don't consider them abandoning the field. So I think I have a very open idea of what it means to impact our field and stay within it. It doesn't mean putting on an architect, engineer, or contractor or cap necessarily, as long as, you know, the people that you work with day in, day out, if not are those people, are people who work with those people.
Definitely. No, really good comment. And speaking of which, Chris on our team, one of your former students we did hire, Chris has been amazing. So shout out to Chris. He did work in kind of traditional architecture firm. He was doing some master planning, kind of design work. But he wanted something a little bit more and wanted to start impacting the world at a little bigger level, and also starting to build out custom tools. And so Chris has been, you know, starting to do quite a bit of coding and custom tool development while also holding true to a lot of his architecture roots. And it helps make him a better designer, a better coder, because he can kind of interweave those two things, which I think is great. To your point, like you don't necessarily have to abandon the practice entirely, and you still can have influence in other places as well, which I think is great. Which also I have a question about.
Actually, before you get to the question, Bill, I just want to cut you off for a second. And say what you just did there was huge. So that's one of the things I teach as a professor, which is you actually said what Chris does is build out his technology tools. And the way it's usually described in social media is tricked out, you know, look at my tricked out, you know, platform or keyboards or whatever they happen to be. And I think that's important because you have to acknowledge your, you know, not to treat our conversation right here on a meta level, but honestly, it makes a huge difference when you think in terms of your audience and shape your message for them. And somebody who's been in the industry will be empathetic to listeners and our clients, or whoever it is we are, you know, talking to. It does not work in terms of whether it's building your platform or your audience base to talk in terms of our own language exclusively. It's helpful to think in terms of others. That's something I know that Chris does really, really well, and you do incredibly well as well.
Thank you, Randy. Appreciate that. That's super generous and nice of you to say. As it relates to that same comment, as it relates to like people and technology, there's also this other area that I think your books touch on as well as is process. And so I always kind of talk about it as this three-legged stool. Like you can't have the process, you know, divorced from the people. The people have to buy into what I call the rules of the game if you have a process that you're going to be doing. Can you talk a little bit about the interweaving of people, process, and technology as it relates to a lot of your books? Because it does look like you talk about technologies as well as process and, you know, super users thinking like an architect, adapting like an architect. It seems like there's this interweaving of those different ideas. And while you're answering that, I also wanted to ask anyone else that has questions for Randy, feel free to throw them in there in the chat window, and I'll try to get those to Randy as we're chatting. But Randy, would you mind chatting about kind of the interweaving in this theme that kind of makes its way through the books that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're being very generous, Bill, in saying interweaving, because I look at it more like dancing. I'm tiptoeing on the subject of process. So starting with my first book, BIM and Integrated Design, and by starting a sentence that way, it could be like a nightmare on a live session like this. Like, I'm not going to go through all 6 books. But starting with that book, integrated design is a process. It was a user-friendly way of talking about integrated project delivery without betting the farm on the idea that IPD was going to take off and take over. In my estimation, IPD is still important, but maybe there's only 100 plus projects in the world where clients and teams have actually committed contractually to it. I've written articles, for the handbook of the Architect's Handbook, and others on the topic, and dedicated a book or two to the topic. But that said, I tiptoe around process because it is a 4-legged stool, but it's really what you're describing is a 3-legged stool, but it's really a 4-legged stool. And I don't want to overcomplicate this, but you're spot on the 3 legs. There's a 4th one that's equally important, and it's the one that's really the heart of every time I'm talking about process, and that is culture. And whether that's, really talking about firm culture. So process is incredibly important, whether it has to do with workflows, whether it has to do with the way we work with others collaboratively and so on. But I think at the same time, most of the tools, the technologies, people and their careers, but even the processes that we're integrating into our workflows, none of them will advance unless we work with enlightened individuals or organizations that have the kind of cultures that are open to listening, open to change, open to trying some of these things. And so I think it's a balancing act between them. I had a live session a couple of weeks ago with Barbara Bryson, who has a new book out that talks about the difference between process and culture. And so without doing a deep dive into that topic right here, I think it's a very timely, it's a very important conversation to have coming out of the pandemic, this idea that we all need to be more empathetic. We saw during the pandemic the rise not just of racial justice, but social justice, this idea that some of the decisions we make have impacts on others, and it's not good enough for us to say that we were unaware of the impacts of our designs or whatever it happens to be. We need to be aware of these things and to enlighten ourselves. And so where I'm going with all this is that I think process is incredibly important. Just as an aside, anecdotally, when I tap into the alums of our program, our architecture schools that I've taught at over the last 20 years, and ask them, and these are alums who have been in the field for 10 or more years, what's the one thing that they feel that our graduates need to know that they don't know? And it's almost a cliche to say, it's almost always business. Why don't they teach business or about business, finances, economics, and so on in school? When I tap into those that have graduated in just the last 5 years, what's missing? It's never business. What they say is workflows. What they wish they knew about was process, was how, whether they're working individually in school or even on teams, they didn't necessarily have a good feel. Even if they had summer internships, they didn't have a good feel for how they were going to plug into these larger teams. And they wish they knew more about process. There were no classes in process. There are no classes in culture either. You just hope that your parents raise you well and that you can tune into it. But process is a big thing, I think, for the up and coming generation. And that's why I do tap into it in all my books. But I also just want to make a plug for culture, that it becomes a much more important part of the discussion.
Definitely. I love that idea. I mean, culture is so important. Your firm can change based on the people you hire and the culture that they bring, either good or bad. So culture is so important to an environment, or what Ryan Cameron talks about is the ecosystem that exists and the people that you have in there. So I love that idea of culture, and seeing that people are open to change and open to new processes. I think that's huge. So then, kind of talking about your newest book, I'm gonna segue here now into Adapt as an Architect. Can you talk a little bit about your motivation for the book? What is the book specifically? Its purpose? Who's the target audience? I mean, I'm assuming, of course, architects, but is it the architect that you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation that's considering other industries or other fields, and why do they need to adapt? I guess I'm asking a lot of questions. So the first one is what was your motivation for the book?
A great question, and I'm going to have a number of answers. So the first one is the very first public talk that I gave was at KA Connect in 2010. Chris Parsons was kind enough to have me speak. This is back before KA Connect. Knowledge Architecture Connect was in San Francisco. It was the very first one was in Chicago. And I gave a talk about how emerging professionals, there was this PDF that NCARB had called the Emerging Professionals Companion, and how the AIA, NCARB, and other groups were kowtowing to younger up-and-coming architects, which is a good thing, right? They're marketing to them. You know, both the REBA, I'm going to be speaking at their academy in the morning tomorrow on Friday, but also AIA National. They're relatively older organizations where the average age in each group is 55. Oh, and wow. So it's important to replenish their members and membership, and to do so, it makes sense that their ads would show 20-something architects and so on. So at the beginning of your career, you get a lot of attention, you get a lot of hand-holding. At your end of your career, you mentioned at the beginning today, before we spoke, that I'm a fellow of the American Institute of Architects in the last year. And there are a lot of accolades available to you later on where they start feathering your description with these additional letters, which is great, you know, so nothing bad about that. But there's this hinterland, there's this desert of 20, 30, 40 years. And this desert's only going to get longer and longer as people live longer and careers get longer. And, you know, the old joke that you need to work, you know, architects don't retire because they can't retire. That's actually not the case. But actually 100% of my students talk about fishing or, you know, racing cars or whatever it is they're going to do in their retirement. But when I was in school, we didn't talk about retirement because architects loved what they did so much that you would want to do it until you essentially dropped. So I think, you know, the first thing is addressing this idea that there's this time period and it's really long and it's not addressed. Nobody talks to or about mid-career architects, but it's the meatiest part of your career. And you're also, you know, there's a lot of psychological and sociological studies that have been done that show, you know, I hate to say it, but people's 40s could take a happiness dip in terms of you have added stresses, not just because it's the time in your career when you're rising within your organization or rising within the profession or industry, but also you're making investments in terms of you're raising a family, perhaps, or you're investing in real estate for yourself and your family, if not flipping projects. There's a lot of stresses that we didn't really have. You're saving for retirement, things we don't do in our 20s necessarily. And all of these things add stresses, and there really isn't a lot of people and things to turn to. And so part of that is the motivation of why I wanted to address in Adapt as an Architect, the middle part of the career. Now, it wouldn't be accurate to, you know, not to turn this into a long soliloquy, but I guess the last thing I'd say on this, to be accurate, is I approached the publisher, Reba Publishing, with more than one book. And I've never done that before. I wanted to write multiple books all at the same time. And I wanted to write them about the different career phases, starting with, if not students, emerging professionals, and then moving on, if not chronologically, but just in terms of where my interests and passion are in mid-career architects, because I really feel like it was important to address them. Now, it so happens that we have this pandemic, we're coming out of it. all had a relatively good read in 2008, coming out of that downturn well into 2011, 2012, that this quote going around that 30% of architects lost their jobs around that time. And I was one of the victims of that time period, as you know, having started to read Adapt as an Architect. We don't have a really good read. I've got a really good read because I have students who do a firm profile. Hopefully none of those firm principals are listening in right now, where my students in teams of 7 students for final semester graduate professional practice, they do a 50-page paper based on a firm. And some of those firms have shared information that I have not read or seen anywhere. I've scoured the internet, I've read every magazine and paper, and I've not come across the read where a lot of firms have had to let go. And again, some of us can pick up on, anecdotally pick up on data like this in Archinect's forum, under the comments, but really legitimate feedback right from firm principals where they said in March of 2020, April of 2020, we had to let go of 50% or more of our firm. Whoa. And those were numbers we didn't even see out of 2008. And these are things we're not even hearing anecdotally. We are, please, readers, put the links in the chat, or if you listen in the future, fire off an email to me and let me know, because that's huge to find out that mid-career architects either lost their jobs during the downturn or are struggling in other ways. And I'm thrilled that I made that decision to pick this as a subject, because the book just came out this month, and it's there as almost a lifesaver, if you don't mind my saying that. And again, it's not because I wrote it, but it's because I invited 50 people in my social network and professional network to chime in on the insights, the wisdom that they've collected in the 10 to 25 or more years of their career to help others.
That's great. And out of those 50 people that you interviewed, was there like a common thread or a common theme that occurred from those interviews that you had with them?
Absolutely. It's the voices resonate with each other. There's not a lot of conflict. Now, there are many different experiences that they've gone through and different roles that they've had. But frankly, just between us, yeah, I didn't know what to expect. You really don't know what you're going to hear. The one commonality is that these are all people I've met or I've known, picked up along the way. I curate my LinkedIn in a way where I only accept one in about 100 people who want to connect. And so why I mention that is, yeah, I didn't randomly look through 22,000 names on LinkedIn and just reach out to them. The first 50 that wanted to chime in on the subject did so. No, these are 50 people from all over the world. They're from different genders, different backgrounds, different roles within firms that are from sole proprietorships to the largest firm in the world. And I think it's really important to say that, I guess this kind of, picks up on the previous question again. It's this idea that even in Australia, where you and I were both speaking at the same time, that after the talks there and everywhere I go, all throughout Europe and North America, people would come up, and I tell the story within Adapt as an Architect. People come up to the dais afterwards. They usually say, thank you for the talk. And then they hand me their card. They say, do you have time for coffee? And that reaching out and asking for coffee, I don't know, are they going to sell me a product? What's really behind this? And it turns out every single time, it's the same thing. They're a mid-career architect. And I was talking about maybe in the talk AI or computational tools or coding. And they just want to know, should I learn Revit? Should I learn coding? Is there a future? Behind everything that they're asking, is there a future for them? And the feeling I had, while I can have coffee and talk for 45 minutes with them, the feeling was always, it's a really privileged, entitled role to be able to go for coffee after a talk and talk to these folks. And when there's much smarter people in my network who I really wish they can pull up chairs at this cafe and talk to. And obviously during the pandemic, we couldn't do that. But even prior to the pandemic, I always felt like, boy, that's a lot of pressure for that. You know, I've got my own blinders, my own biases. You know, I'm not going to, you know, as you know already, I'm not going to tell them go work for Pixar Studios or open an ice cream truck with clever names of ice cream products that are named after famous architects. That's not, you're not going to hear that from me. If you go do that, I'll buy your ice cream, but you know, or watch your movie. No question about that. I'll support you. But the bottom line is that I'm going to want you to stay. But maybe there's others out there. So going back to your question, everyone that I reached out to wants you to stay. And yes, they want you to reinvent. You know, the two parts of the book, the first half of the book is on relevance and how you become relevant and remain relevant for 25, 30, 40 years. And all of those insights are not only spot on, but they form a symphony. They all support each other. They're all backing each other. The second half of the book is about reinvention. And it's an incredibly important thing, reinvention. There's a lot of people who are out there who think when you reinvent, you need to take your architectural education and reinvent and do something completely different. But these 50 folks didn't really talk about it that way. They talked about the importance of reinvention, like I do in one of my TED Talks on, or TEDx talks on what I call the 7-year career, this importance of always having one career, and don't throw that away, but always have these side careers, like, you know, side dishes in a meal. That every so often, I've met architects who reinvent that side meal or side career every 3 years, 2 years, 4 years. I happen to reinvent mine every 7 years, almost to the day. And when I didn't have one recently, I actually put a feeler out there, you know, just like a lot of people will do in a chat or in social media, on Twitter. You say, you know, every 7 years I changed my career. Coming up next month is that 7-year mark. I'm starting my 43rd year of my career. That's what I said. I really didn't have one. They've always shown up, not just the people, you know, who are out there who are supportive, but actually these careers just magically show up. And sure enough, it wasn't somebody responding on social media, but it was somebody in my network who had actually included my name on a grant submittal, and it came to light, and I became an AI researcher. And that, you know, I went from cartoonist to playwright to professor and book author, public speaker, urban planner and designer, all the time while being an architect. And, you know, I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but yeah, I was able to find one for the next 7 years as an AI researcher with paid grant, you know, research, and I'm thrilled. So that's how that happened.
That's good. Appreciate that, Randy. So you were talking a bit about like how you've reinvented yourself and side dishes. And in your book, Patrick in our stream just mentioned, he said in your book, you talk about mid-career architects needing for, quote, retaining relevance. And he said he was a sole practitioner, and he wanted to know if you could talk about regaining relevance. So after 10 years of being a sole practitioner, he started picked up data analysis. Interesting. And so can you talk about the difference between retaining relevance and then also regaining relevance? Are the two the same, or are there different steps to follow, or any advice for Patrick that's listening?
Yeah, not to play on words, I talk about remaining relevant and then reinventing yourself so that you remain relevant into the future. So the first thing is just gaining relevance to begin with. And a lot of the people, the 50 folks I talked to for my book, chimed in on this. It was just anecdotal until they vouched. You know, I don't know if 50 data points is even enough. It's not big data, but I am completely sold on this idea. And I make my living as a university professor. So it's hard to say this to my students, but I do share this with them, especially ones that have 6-figure student loans to pay off. And that is, you will not use anything you learn in school 5 years into your career. That was certainly the case for me 35 years ago, and that is the case now. So then why do you go to architecture school? And that becomes a whole different discussion. It's still really important to have that education. And you're not going to get that education by reading a book on, design thinking, or taking a business class, or watching a TED Talk. To Patrick's question, I think the way I really would want to respond to this is when I have conversations like the one that you and I are having, Bill, somebody will write in the chat, well, I'm a sole proprietor, and when you're done talking in 45 minutes, I'm going to go right back to my job, and it's going to be exactly the way I left it an hour ago. And it's going to be the same way when I wake up in the morning. And the first thought I have, what I draw in the margins of my notes to the right over here, is a little picture of a frog in a boiling pot of water. Because a lot of us can tell ourselves, especially the folks who do it all, sole proprietors who do everything. And Patrick, this is not you, and this is not your question, but I think it's an important message about why remaining relevant throughout your career is really important. No, you're absolutely right. You're not going to, nothing's going to change this afternoon or tomorrow. But like the proverbial frog in the pot who says, the water's still nice, it's nice and toasty, it's nice and warm and comfortable in here. It is boiling, and it's getting faster and faster. And yes, every generation, if there was an octogenarian in this call right now, they may say this was the case, years and years ago. We always said it was faster and faster, and it was back then. But it's exponentially happening faster now. It's part of the reason we have people like Bill in the industry, and we need people like Bill in Evolve Lab in the industry, is to help all of us to remain relevant and keep up. And all I'm doing in the book is pointing out that we need to consciously do this, not just accidentally. So going, again, more targetedly to Patrick's question, yeah, data analysis, fantastic. Yes, there are apps that can do that. Just having the awareness that this is something that's important, having the awareness that buildings, the way I put it as a professor, there's 3 ways I teach every class. Buildings is buildings, and that would be, let's say, architecture history class or design studio, and buildings is documents when I teach professional practice, or even my sophomore sequence of construction classes. Those are buildings as documents. But buildings as databases is hugely important. And yes, the data can go beyond buildings. It could be public and private data that belongs to our clients. But just even asking that question and having your own firm is huge. Being aware of it, being able to provide it, whether the business model or the value proposition is adding it as an additional service or as your brand. Talking about everything that you do in terms of the data analysis and how it leads to a great design. Fletcher Associates is a landscape firm in San Francisco who took South Park, the oldest park in the United States, certainly the oldest park in San Francisco, and redesigned it based on data analysis, looking at all the surrounding properties, where people were walking from, where they're riding bikes or taking public transportation, how they were using the park at lunchtime or during off hours, and then redesign the entire park based on design analysis. Yeah, Fletcher didn't make that their brand. They just made an incredible story about this one park. And so leveraging that data analysis, I think, is really, really huge. Now, you could take it a step further and actually have that inform your design. I think somebody who does that really remarkably well, I talk about it in super users a little bit, is Scott Crawford at LMN Architects. There's certainly others who do this. Nate Miller, of course, has built a whole business based on it. But Scott is somebody who basically, whether working within a dashboard or just working within specific tools, doesn't draw buildings or design buildings using lines or models, but does so just by leveraging data. And that's huge. And we should all be doing that, right? Because you're cutting off these in-between steps where with every step we have a data dump, right? We have a data drain. We're losing data between each project phase and between each tool that we hop off of to move on to another one. So if you can find a way to leverage that data, not just to win clients and win projects, but also to have it influence your brand and actually bring it into your designs, That is fantastic. And that's the future.
I love that. That was going to be a question I had for you, and I'm glad you already answered it. It was a good question as it relates to data analytics. And I did a talk at AU a few years ago on the data-driven design chasm and how to overcome some of that. And I think a lot of us in the design industry, I always said we use, Revit as this kind of glorified drafting tool, but it's a building information modeling tool. And now what I'm seeing, Randy, and I'm curious if you agree, is we're kind of in this next wave, through the recession in 08, 09, and the adoption of BIM, for the majority of firms. I don't know if you see this, but I'm seeing this next kind of tidal wave of now what I just simply say, doing stuff with data. Like you're starting to design with data. It's data-driven design. You're optimizing your design based on daylighting analysis or floor area ratios or Bowman calculations or whatever you're trying to optimize, and starting to leverage the data for optimization. Where to Patrick's question of like a data analytics, seems like that would be really valuable to be able to start kind of using that data for your design. Can you talk a little bit about, for those of us that are in the architecture industry, how we might start using data to drive design? And is that imperative to adapt as an architect regarding your frog analogy? Is that something that we have to do or should be doing as it relates to our career path and making sure we stay, quote, relevant? Can you speak to that a bit?
Sure. And by the way, not as a plug, but Bill, you invented all of this. The future is not BIM. Your wonderful talks with tens of thousands of hits. You've been speaking to this for a long time yourself. I could turn this whole conversation around and have you answer all these questions. But I will share with you what I'm seeing. So what I'm seeing is this. And I'm hoping not to alienate or offend anybody who's listening in right now. Again, I don't think we can separate the question from culture, because anybody can follow their passion. And I am a huge proponent of following your passion. If you're not interested in data, if you don't recognize data when it hits you over the head, then if you don't even know how to pronounce it, data, then I think there is no reason to pick it up. And I'm pretty sure the 50 folks, if I asked them that specific question, which I did not, but gave them plenty of opportunity to talk about it and adapt as an architect, I think it's not a worthwhile pursuit, both because if the culture of your organization, as well as the very slow uptake of our industry, will work against you if you don't have the passion to pursue it. Now, let's flip that one on its head. If you are interested, if you recognize that data is the future, and I certainly do, I absolutely see that. And if you can find a way to work it into your practice, to work it into your workflow, to work it into your conversation, to find a way for everything that you already do to have a data component, or readout, like I mentioned a moment ago, working in a dashboard, where a lot of times in the past we felt that data did nothing more than inform our intuition, where we could say we like something, that's a good start, but that then you have the data to back it up, and that's what the client likes to hear, and your boss likes to hear. But let's take this further. If you work in a dashboard and you've got all those pie charts and bar charts off to one side, and you exponentially smooth one of your building models, and in real time you see those charts starting to manipulate. As I talk about in Data-Driven Design, a 2015 book, that we still have not caught up to as an industry, and not because of the pandemic, again, because of our culture. There's this idea that if every single time you open your refrigerator at home to get some milk or to get a piece of fruit, and your laptop was open and you saw how much money was spent if you left that refrigerator door open, how quickly that would change your behavior. Similarly, that dashboard improves us as designers in real time. You actually become a more intuitive designer. It's not just about informing your design, it's improving your design. So I believe in so many different ways that data is the answer, and it is, it's going to be moving forward. That said, we continue to live, especially coming out of the pandemic, in what has been referred to by others a long time ago as an experience economy. And I know Shane Berger has talked about the importance of experience design. And of course, we have UX design in design interfaces. Why am I saying all this? Because I don't think we're going to need to look at coding. I don't think we're going to need to lift the hood and look at data. Just doing what Patrick's doing and recognizing the importance of data is a huge first step. And then the second one is have smart folks like you that are out there creating the tools or helping others leverage the tools that are already out there that can leverage the data, where we don't have to even use the word data anymore. We just are using the tools to just make us better, make us more effective, and going back to the question at hand, make us more relevant for everybody else. I think the less we talk about the data, unless we talk about coding, unless we, all of this stuff, the more we're really talking about others and their needs. So yeah, Fletcher Studio that did that park, they're heroes, not because they talk about data, they're heroes because they designed a park where magically everybody feels like they belong there. Everyone feels welcome there. Like, whoa, there's a curb cut exactly where I want one to be. Lo and behold, how did that happen? Somebody worked that out. There are problems with data. I'm going to just share. So let's, the question I'd have for Fletcher Studios, if you're listening in, is, yeah, there was a realtor at one of the intersections that's near the park, and realtors don't have a lot of foot traffic. So let's say that realtor went bottom up during the pandemic and became a grocery store that has a lot of foot traffic. How would that have changed the design? And is the design agile or flexible enough to accommodate that? Are there certain things baked into the data that are biased, not unethical necessarily, but biased towards pre-existing conditions? Is it the perfect park for today, but not for 3 years from now? Those are things that I think we need to all ask ourselves and search. What's behind that data, the people who created it, and so on. So in the AI research that I'm part of for a National Science Foundation and a Discovery Partners Institute series of grants and seed funding, I'm in charge of the ethics questions. Everyone needs to ask them, but I'm in charge as an architect that teaches for over 20 years professional practice. Maybe that's why I was asked to do this. But these are things that come up all the time. I'm not the first person to raise them, even in our industry. And these are things we need to ask ourselves. So data is really important, but we also need to know, where did it come from, right? They're as biased as our algorithms are. They're created by humans, and we need to address them.
Totally, I agree with you. I like, first off, I have to address your comment of me being super smart and leading the charge on all that. Selfishly, part of the reason I'm doing this is to interview and learn from others, because there's so much collaboration in our community. And the reason bringing you on, so this is really selfishly benefiting me and learning from you and others that we have on. So I really appreciate that and appreciate you coming on. The other thing I wanted to comment on quickly is the idea of the informed designs based on data. And we talked about coded having a bias in the algorithms and things like that. I thought that was really good. You mentioned, and we talked, when I talked with Mike Kirshner 2 weeks ago, we talked about coded bias and how algorithms have that. And you also talked about coding. Like, we might, as architects, and I don't know if you said this or not, maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I've heard some people substantiate so much so that, like, if you're an architect, you have to learn to code. Otherwise, you're not going to have a job in 4 years, like, get on the bandwagon, like these dire conditions. And what I've kind of seen, and I'm curious if you agree, is a few years ago, I was talking about part of the barrier to entry to some of these data-driven solutions is the coding and, the spaghetti mess that is Grasshopper or Dynamo. And there's a high learning curve. But then what we're starting to see in the industry is a lot of productized tools, like you get a testfit.io or an Archistar, where now you're starting to get a turnkey solution. You don't necessarily need to be a coder, but you can actually, as an architect, start to use these tools to help inform design. So as it still relates to the question of relevance and adapting as an architect, and believe me, no one has more of a bias towards like coding. That's our main jam. Like, we hire people that are architects that code. Like, I very much believe in that, and we're passionate about that at Evolve Lab. But I don't necessarily personally feel like that needs to be the entire industry, and I don't personally feel like you're going to be out of a job in 4 years if you're not an architect and coding. Do you disagree, or can you speak to that a little bit as it relates to some of these other tools that are coming out? And if they're turnkey, do architects still have to learn to code, or is there, not that there's not value, I think there's value. I think we both agree value in learning to code. But is it a do or die kind of scenario as it relates to adapting as an architect?
Yeah, it is. So emphatically, learning to code is not a do or die skill set to have. It is absolutely not. Now that said, here's the caveat, and I hate caveats because it's like the word but, and the word but basically erases everything that was said before. And so okay. What the caveat is this: should everybody, I'm at the point in my life where I can use the word should everybody learn how to code? Yes, absolutely. Why? Because you don't want to be a victim. You don't want to be a victim of software manufacturers. You don't want to be a victim of the unknown. You don't want to be a victim of when your boss or your professional colleagues ask you a question because there's something about the results that you've pinned up on the wall that has that feeling of what can only be referred to as otherwiseness, and they're feeling a little anxious about it or questioning what they're not questioning you, they're questioning the software. So what I'm getting at is our tools in algorithms and AI in particular are black boxes. And something I talk about pretty frequently is how we who use these tools are becoming black boxes to the people we work with. I mean, there's a huge question mark over all of our heads because they want to trust us. Some of us are better at building trust and knowing that it takes time to do it. You're not going to build trust in a handshake or eye contact or something like that. But it's a question of trust. It's a question of not being a victim. It's a question of empowering ourselves as designers. So if we all learn to code, if we all learn about the spaghetti in Grasshopper and lifting the hood on our tools, then we know at least what was involved in manipulating them or what would be involved. There was nothing worse 30 years ago when I would have my team leader come by my workstation at the office and say, I have a half-hour assignment for you. Here it is. And it's the biggest cliche in the world when that half-hour assignment was really a week long. And it's because they had never done it themselves. They had never, and then I felt like, like I really wasn't up to, maybe I shouldn't be an architect because it took me a week to do what they said should have taken 30 minutes to do. And it just turned out, it took a lot of these assignments to discover that they didn't know what they were talking about, that they had never actually tried it themselves. And had they sat down and tried it, it would have taken them a week or longer. So a lot of what this is learning to, walk the talk, but also manage ourselves and our communications by actually doing a deep dive. I mean, I commend people like Shane Berger who take tools home on, formerly perhaps, if not currently, on mass transportation in New York City, or take them home in the evenings and weekends. He's a super user because he messes with stuff all the time, but in part so he can just, not so he does, spends 100% of his time in the office leveraging these tools, but so when he works with others with these tools, he knows what's behind them, what they're capable of, what they're not capable of, what it would take for somebody in the firm to actually leverage it. Does this tool speak well with other tools, and so on. So I think that's the first part of it, is this idea of empowering ourselves in the industry, not being a victim of software manufacturers and even some of these startups, but then also recognizing that there's this current generation of baby boomers who are leaving, they should have left leadership positions in 2008. You know who you are if you're listening in, and you didn't. Maybe your 401ks got bombarded during that time and you stuck around for a decade longer. And the Gen X's don't necessarily want to step up and lead organizations unless they're their own. And leadership isn't really what it's about for them. And so, yes, it's going to take 5 to 7 years for the millennials and the Gen Zs to completely lead our field. And we're going to have something of a renaissance for the next 5 to 7 years, I believe, during this time period of transition. And it's going to be wonderful. in a lot of different ways. So I don't mean to bring up a new topic so late in our conversation, but what I'm really trying to say is that I think it's going to be really important for people to expose themselves to coding and then reject it.
I like it. It's a great answer. Actually, I love how you said that. We also have another question from someone. They were asking regarding if a firm's, hiring for a data-based AEC job, similar to like maybe what Patrick was looking for. The core of their question is if they learned AEC first and then learned data engineering later, or data analytics later, or if they had a data analytics background first and then learned the AEC engineering side later. Which is better that helps inform? Do you feel like one is better than the other? Data analytics first, then AEC, or AEC, then data analytics, and why?
Yeah, that's such a fantastic question. And I'm going to totally wimp out with this answer. And the answer is yes. So it's basically both. So it's basically how I teach architecture. Why are we thinking linearly? Why are we thinking one has to come before the other? Well, in this specific question, if somebody came from AEC and then picked up data or data analysis, or working with data, if I had to pick one or the other, I'd say that is better. Because then really what they used to say in the 60s and 70s, you grok it, you get it in your bones and your sinew, you really understand what's behind, the conflicts and what's behind all of the questions we have when you're designing a building and trying to implement the building, whether it's through fabrication or construction, and then moving to operations. You really understand that, and then you layer over that data that's in working with data. I think that's probably the way to go. I have seen people leave Google to work in our industry and field because of that thing that I brought up earlier about pointing out the window and not being able to point to something substantial. When their child asks them what do they do for a living and they hold up a spreadsheet and they say, I do this, that's literally, that's that, come to Mary moment that they have with themselves where they're, like, oh my God, did I really just say that? And then the child walks around not knowing really what their parent does versus, driving by a building, pointing out the window saying, I helped create this and bring this into the world, just like I helped bring you into the world. So I think that's the way to go. I think it's more fulfilling overall. You can come from Google to AEC because you think it's gonna be more fulfilling and it can stick. But there's a lot of head scratching saying, I don't know why you guys do what you do the way you do it. And those people are very entertaining in our office. They're really great. I love being pointed out that we do everything backwards. But don't we already know we do everything backwards? Do we really need some kind of sarcastic person in the office pointing out that we have really ineffectual ways of, doing what we do? No, I don't think we need that. As entertaining and as fun as it is to have somebody like that, I think it's better for us to really see how ineffectual we are the first time around through school and then working in practice, then to discover this way that we can improve upon ourselves. That would be the way to go.
I love it. Great comment. Ahmad's asking, Randy, he wants to know for someone that's starting their coding journey, what would you recommend as tools that they need to achieve their quote renaissance or career trajectory? He's saying he's assuming that that person already has an AEC background. Maybe they're an architect. What tools do they need to kind of start going down that journey? What would you recommend?
Yeah, so 5 or 6 years ago, I asked the tool question in my data-driven design and construction book, even about coding. And yeah, the answers you can get into are about specific tools. And I find that that's not the best way to go. The best way isn't starting with the tools and by asking the tool question. It's about looking at how people do these wonderful magic tricks in our industry. Talk to smart people like Bill does, like Ryan Cameron and other smart people like Nate Miller who are leveraging these tools to do their magic. These are the remarkable people that they should both be performing. There's a handful of others who should be performing their tricks in Las Vegas. It's at that level of performance. They wow clients. I mean, I love the story in Super Users where Ryan Cameron Where, somebody through the office kind of walked around and looked over Ryan's shoulder and saw what he was doing. They weren't looking and asking about the tool. They were looking at the results saying, wow, can I have me some of that? I mean, can I bring your laptop in and you into the meeting with our client right now? Because this is what they should be seeing. And the client goes, yeah, whatever that is, do that for me. That's how we all should be talking about this stuff. Obviously, it gets a lot more difficult when Bill and I today are done, talking. And I don't want you to necessarily go out and buy Data-Driven Design and Construction to look in the index. I think you can go to the Wiley site and download the PDF of the index. And you can find the Microsoft recommended products and a few others that are just in the index for free and the PDFs that are there. You don't have to buy the book. So I'm not going to go through the whole litany of tools that are out there. The tools change all the time. It's my full belief that, you do want to do a deep dive into the tools, but then find the ones that are user-friendly that work for you so you don't have to work for them. Getting them to work with each other and so on. So I know it's a very vague answer, but I also think there are a lot smarter people than me that are out there doing really remarkable things with these tools. Again, Scott Crawford again at LMN, watch their videos, watch what they're doing. Look over their shoulders, read the articles they've come up with, follow them on social media, and you'll just get better through osmosis that way. And that's really the original intention of social networks, was just being around smart folks like that. They make everyone else around them smarter. They're what I refer to in super users as talent accelerants, in force multipliers. Those two things are really incredibly important. Stick around people like that, and Bill, of course, and you'll just get better at what you do that way, as opposed to, here are the 3 tools to purchase, and this is how you can get them discounted.
That's great. You answered another one of my questions. You're an author, Randy, and you write all these amazing books. It's great to hear that you also consume information and read other people's articles and rub shoulders with the likes of Brian and others that are also doing that. I want to kind of since we're at the top of the hour, I want to share again, for all those that didn't see at the beginning, if you haven't yet, go check out Randy's books, buy the books. He has a bunch of different books that you can access. Randy, are all of these on Amazon, or if we wanted to do, I think these are great for Q&A for this, but if people want to do a deeper dive, I think these are a great place to go further. Can you comment, are all these available on Amazon, or where can we access these books?
Yeah, they're available on Amazon. You can go to randydeutsch.com and just click on the link there if you want. I don't get any benefit from doing that. They're also at the publisher's site, but I'll just share this. If you just type in the words Taylor Francis, that's sort of a mega publisher, Taylor and Francis, and then the name of the book or my name, what you'll get is a bunch of free excerpts, sometimes as much as 50 or 60 pages.
Oh, wow.
The beginning of these books. It's a lot, and Taylor and Francis does that. I don't think they realize that they're giving away all these free excerpts. I think you maybe have to sign up for them, but for some reason, everyone can access them. So until they listen in to Bill's talk, they won't know that everyone else can access them. So that might be the best way to go before investing in the books themselves. Some of these books are kind of expensive and you really want to know what you're getting into. I do want to do a shout out to Ashish, who asked a great question. I'm sorry to make this go on a minute too long, but I do want to say leading is incredibly important. And what I found to be the best way to go about leading in these efforts within your organization, first of all, kudos to you if you have the opportunity to lead, is Jordan Billingsley's brilliant approach. He's a graduate of our program, as is Ashish. And I just want to say Jordan really figured it out by letting individuals take the lead. It's actually not being the leader with the top-down approach saying, today I'm going to do a talk on sketching in AutoCAD, or as I was talking about in Twitter earlier today, designing buildings in Rhino. No, you actually have, whether it's a computational group that meets quarterly or monthly within your firm, each one picks what they're passionate about, comes back and reports on it. And if that report sounds sound or sounds like a good thing, yeah, turn it into a presentation, and then quarterly, you present it to the whole rest of the firm, and then you actually serve as a leader for that specific tool within your organization. Kudos and shout out to Jordan Billingsley and Ashish.
That's great. Really appreciate that shout out. And Randy, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all of your knowledge. You know, I was telling my friend Michael, you know, as it relates to money, you can always make more money. You can't make more time. And time, as I get older, is this currency that you just can't get back. And so you've given us all something that you can never get back. And so we so appreciate you giving us your time and coming on the show. We really do. Thank you, Randy.
Thrilled to do it. Thank you so much. Great to be here with everyone.
All right. Take care, everybody. Go check out Randy's books. If you have any questions, Randy, where can people find you? Are you on LinkedIn, Twitter? What's the best way? You mentioned your website. Is that the best way we can get a hold of you or learn more about you and your books?
Yeah. When I'm not talking to Bill Allen, I'm on Twitter. So
all right.
Literally.